Max pulled into his driveway a little after midnight, the familiar crunch of gravel under his tires oddly comforting until he saw it. A sleek black Mercedes parked arrogantly in front of the house, as if it belonged there. It didn't. He had never seen this car before. His heart rate quickened, a bitter taste creeping into his mouth. It was late, sure, but Camille wouldn't have company at this hour. Right? Sliding out of the car, Max tried to shake the feeling creeping up his spine. He had been away for a few days, closing a big business deal. Camille knew he was supposed to come home tomorrow, not tonight. Maybe that's why the front door was slightly ajar, lights dim, barely glowing from the living room. The house felt wrong. He hesitated, hand hovering over the door handle. Then he heard faint voices from upstairs. Laughter, muffled sounds of pleasure. It hit him like a slap. This wasn't a nightmare, this was real. Someone was in his house, in his bedroom. Max's mind raced, disbelief turning into a dark, hot rage. There was no mistaking it. Each step up the stairs felt heavier, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. His hand tightened into a fist as he approached the door. It was slightly open. The sounds from inside the intimacy cut through him like a blade. He pushed the door wide open. There they were. Camille, his wife, wrapped in the arms of a younger man, both too caught up to even notice him standing there, rage burning through his veins. The man smiled in his sleep, unaware that everything was about to change. This was the moment Max realized he wasn't the same man who left for that business trip. This moment, this betrayal would unleash something in him he hadn't known was buried. Something dark, and tonight it was coming out. For a moment Max just stood there, rooted to the floor, staring at the scene before him. Camille was draped over the man like she belonged there, her bare skin glistening in the dim light. The stranger's arm was wrapped possessively around her waist, and the peaceful rise and fall of their chests enraged Max more than anything. It was as if they had no care in the world, completely at ease in his bed. Max's fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind was a whirlwind. Images of their life together flashed before his eyes. The moments they laughed, cried, fought, loved. The nights spent in that very bed, where he once thought they shared everything. Now, that space was violated, defiled by her and this intruder. A faint ringing buzzed in his ears, his vision narrowing to the two bodies entwined before him. Max's lips curled into a humorless grin. This is real. This is actually happening. The house had been so quiet, so welcoming when he first walked in. He had expected to surprise Camille, maybe cuddle up beside her after the long trip, and whisper in her ear about the deal he closed. But instead, this was his homecoming. The rage boiled beneath his skin, the heat of it almost unbearable. He hadn't planned for this, hadn't expected to find his wife sharing their bed with another man. Max's breaths became slow and deliberate as he stepped forward, his eyes never leaving them. There was a surreal calm that took over him, like he was watching someone else, moving through the scene like a ghost. He didn't scream, didn't lash out yet. No, he wanted to savor this, to let the horror sink into every fiber of their being. He reached for the bedside lamp and flicked it on with a sharp snap. The light flooded the room, harsh and revealing. Camille jerked awake first, her eyes blinking rapidly as they adjusted to the brightness. She froze, her gaze locking with Max's. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The color drained from her face, her hand still resting on the stranger's bare chest. Max, Camille stammered, trying to pull the sheets over her body, as if that would somehow hide the betrayal, as if she could shield herself from the wreckage she had caused. But Max wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes were on the man James, or whatever the hell his name was. The guy was younger, more athletic. His muscles rippled under the sheets as he slowly woke up, confusion etched on his face. Max felt a surge of satisfaction seeing the dawning realization in the man's eyes, the fear creeping in. James sat up, his mouth opening to say something, an apology. An excuse? Max didn't care. He was already moving before the man could speak, his body acting on pure instinct. He lunged forward, grabbing the guy by the throat, slamming him back against the headboard with a sickening thud. Who the hell do you think you are? Max hissed through gritted teeth, his fingers digging into the man's neck, squeezing harder with each word. James gasped, his hands flailing, trying to pry Max's fingers loose, but Max didn't let up. He felt powerful, almost godlike in that moment, watching the man squirm beneath him. Camille screamed, finally snapping out of her shock. Max, stop, please, just let him go. She reached for him, trying to pull him off, but Max barely registered her touch. The only thing that mattered was the raw, primal need to punish, to hurt, to make this man feel every ounce of the agony he had caused. With a roar, Max shoved the man off the bed, sending him crashing to the floor. The sight of James, naked and scrambling for breath, was almost enough to satisfy the monster now fully awake inside Max. Almost, but not quite. He turned toward Camille, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You, what the hell were you thinking?" She didn't answer, tears streaming down her face, trembling under the weight of his fury. This wasn't the end. No, this was only the beginning. Max stood over them, chest heaving with each ragged breath. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in around him as the gravity of the situation settled in. James coughed on the floor, gasping for air, his face contorted in a mix of fear and confusion. Camille cowered in the bed, clutching the sheets to her chest, as if they could protect her from the storm that was Max. "What the hell were you thinking, Camille?" His voice was venomous, each word dripping with betrayal. "In our bed? With him?" She couldn't look at him, her eyes darting around the room, as though searching for some kind of escape, some reality where this wasn't happening. "Max, I didn't mean for this to happen." Her voice cracked, weak and pathetic. "It was a mistake. I'm sorry. A mistake." Max's voice was sharp, louder now. He let out a bitter laugh, running his hand through his hair, disbelief rippling through him. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning. This," he gestured to the tangled mess of sheets, Camille's pale face, and the still naked man on the floor. "This is a fucking choice." James tried to push himself up, struggling to stand, but Max wasn't done with him yet. He lashed out, his foot connecting with James's ribs, sending him sprawling back onto the floor with a yelp. Camille screamed again, the sound piercing, but Max didn't care. He couldn't stop himself. The rage was in full control now, and it demanded more. "Shut up!" Max shouted at her, his voice booming. "You're not the victim here, Camille. You brought this into our home, into our bed." His words were like knives cutting through the fragile silence that followed. James groaned, clutching his side, his face contorted in pain. Max wanted to feel sorry for him, wanted to see the scared, broken man lying on the floor as a victim, but he couldn't. James had made a choice too, one that ripped Max's life apart in the span of a few hours. There was no room for pity, only vengeance. Camille sobbed now, her body trembling as she tried to find the right words, but they never came. Max watched her, waiting, hoping for anything that could explain this. But all he saw was weakness, cowardice. The woman he loved, the woman he had shared his life with, was reduced to this shaking, crying mess in front of him. "Why him?" Max finally asked, quieter now but no less deadly. "After everything we've been through, Camille, why him?" "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible between her sobs. "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to." She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" Max's voice was laced with disgust. "What, you just accidentally fell on his dick?" James winced from the floor, but said nothing, his breath labored as he curled into himself. Camille looked up, her tear-streaked face full of shame. Max stared at her, the rage within him boiling hotter by the second. "You're pathetic," Max spat. "I trusted you. I fucking trusted you, Camille." "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice cracking, as if those two little words would somehow undo the damage, erase the betrayal. Max felt the weight of it all crashing down on him, the years of love, of commitment, of building a life together. All of it shattered in one night. His mind raced, thoughts darting from one horrific conclusion to the next. There was no going back. This wasn't something they could recover from. Without another word, Max stormed over to the dresser, yanking open drawers and pulling out clothes, stuffing them into a bag. Camille's sobs grew louder, but he ignored her. He needed to get out, needed to escape the stifling weight of betrayal in the room. "Max, please don't leave," Camille pleaded through her tears. "We can fix this, I swear." He stopped, looking at her one last time, eyes cold and unforgiving. "No, Camille, you broke it." With that, he slung the bag over his shoulder, stepped over the still wheezing James, and walked out the door, leaving behind the wreckage of his life. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The door slammed shut behind him, but the echoes of what had happened would never leave. Not for him, not for Camille, and certainly not for James. Max stormed down the stairs, his pulse pounding in his ears, each step harder than the last. The weight of what he'd just done hung over him like a storm cloud, but he pushed it away. He had to get out, had to breathe. The air in that room had been suffocating, filled with the stench of betrayal, of lies. Camille's sobs trailed behind him, faint now as if they belonged to someone far away. Someone else, not his wife, not anymore. He reached the front door, pausing for a second as his fingers rested on the handle. His mind replayed the image of Camille in bed with that man, the sound of their laughter echoing in his head like a taunt. He squeezed his eyes shut, his jaw clenching. The rage was still there, burning just beneath the surface, but now there was something else. Something colder, numbness. For a moment he stood still, his breath shaky as he tried to steady himself. Part of him wanted to turn around, go back upstairs, and finish what he started with James, to make him pay for touching Camille, for daring to set foot in his home. But Max knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was done. Violence wouldn't fix what had already been shattered. He yanked the door open and stepped out into the cool night air. It hit him like a slap, the cold breeze stinging his face, but he welcomed it. Anything to wake him from this nightmare. His car sat in the driveway, bathed in the pale glow of the moonlight. The sight of it brought a brief flicker of normalcy, as if he could just get in, drive away, and leave all of this behind. But nothing would ever be normal again. As he approached his car, something inside him hesitated. The bag slung over his shoulder felt heavier now, like it carried more than just clothes. It carried the weight of every decision he was about to make, the finality of it all. He threw it in the back seat and stood there, his hands on the roof of the car, head hanging low. For a long moment he just breathed, trying to calm the chaos swirling in his mind. Then a sound broke the silence. Footsteps. Light, hurried footsteps coming from the house. Camille. "Max, wait," she called, her voice hoarse, barely more than a whisper. She was standing on the porch, clutching her robe tightly around her body, the same body he had seen tangled with someone else's just moments ago. Tears stained her cheeks, her hair a wild mess. She looked desperate, broken. But so was he. He didn't turn to face her. He couldn't. If he looked at her now, he might lose control again, and this time he wasn't sure what he'd do. His hands gripped the car roof tighter, knuckles white. "Please don't leave like this," she begged, her voice cracking. "We can talk. We can fix this. It was a mistake, Max. Just come back inside, and we can work through it." Max let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow and empty. He shook his head, still not turning around. "You think we can fix this? After what you did? After him?" His voice was cold, detached. "There's nothing left to fix, Camille." "I'm sorry," she sobbed, stepping closer. "I swear, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I love you, Max. You have to believe that." Max finally turned, his eyes locking onto hers. The pain in them was raw, visceral, but his face remained expressionless, cold. "You don't love me," he said quietly. "Not anymore. Maybe you did once, but not now. You don't do what you did if you love someone." She reached out, her hand trembling as it hovered near his arm, but he stepped back, avoiding her touch. "Max, please." "Don't," he cut her off, his voice sharp. "Just don't." He could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear that she was losing him slipping into her expression. Maybe she really did regret it. Maybe she thought she could pull it all back from the edge. But Max knew better. Some things you don't come back from. This was one of them. Without another word, he climbed into the car, slamming the door shut. Camille stood on the porch, watching helplessly as he started the engine. She mouthed something, maybe please, but he didn't care anymore. Max drove away, the cold night swallowing him whole. The road stretched out ahead of him, endless and empty, just like the space where his heart used to be. The cold, empty road stretched endlessly before Max, the hum of the engine, the only sound breaking the silence of the night. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white, the tension in his body refusing to ease. The rage that had consumed him back in that bedroom still simmered under the surface, but now it was mingled with something else, an unbearable emptiness. He'd left Camille standing there on the porch, tears streaming down her face, her words trailing behind him like ghosts. But there was no going back. Max knew that much. He had crossed a line tonight, one that could never be undone. He kept driving. But the farther he went, the heavier the silence became. His mind raced back to the events of the night, the moment he saw that Mercedes, the slight creak of the bedroom door, and then the sight of her, tangled up with another man. It felt surreal, like it had happened to someone else. But no, it had happened to him. That was his life, shattered in an instant. Max's phone buzzed on the passenger seat, pulling him out of his thoughts. He glanced at it, Camille's name flashing on the screen. His jaw tightened, his breath coming in short, angry bursts as the phone rang and rang. She had the audacity to call him now, to try and salvage something from the wreckage. He reached for the phone, intending to toss it out of the window, but instead he answered it. "What?" His voice was cold, laced with venom. "Max, please, just don't hang up." Camille's voice came through the speaker, shaky and filled with tears. "We need to talk. We can't leave it like this. I made a mistake, A horrible mistake, but we can still. You think this can be fixed? Max cut her off, his voice rising. You think we can just sit down, have a conversation, and make it all go away? You fucked another man in our bed, Camille. There's no coming back from that. I know, she cried, her voice desperate. I know what I did, but it didn't mean anything. I was lonely, and I don't know why I did it. But I swear, Max, I love you. I still love you. Love? Max laughed bitterly. You don't love me. You love what I gave you. The comfort, the security, the house, the fucking life we built together. But you don't love me. Not if you could do what you did. I do love you. Camille's voice broke. It was a mistake, just a stupid, one-time thing. I didn't want to hurt you. Please, Max, we can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can. Max slammed his hand against the steering wheel, the force of it reverberating through the car. You don't get it, do you? This isn't something we can patch up with therapy sessions and apologies. You destroyed everything. You destroyed us. There was silence on the other end, the sound of Camille's soft sobs the only thing he could hear. For a moment, he felt something stir in his chest, something like the remnants of the love they once shared. But it was gone as quickly as it had come, replaced by the cold, brutal reality. I can't do this, Camille, Max said quietly, his voice drained of the anger now. You made your choice. You chose him. And now I'm choosing me. Max, please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Don't leave me. I already have, he said, and without another word he hung up the phone. He tossed it into the passenger seat, his chest tight as the finality of it all washed over him. He had left her. He had left behind everything they had built together, everything he thought was real. But there was no other option. Staying would have meant living with the constant reminder of her betrayal, of the fact that the person he trusted most in the world had ripped his heart out without a second thought. The road ahead was empty, dark and uncertain, much like his future. He had no idea where he was going or what he would do next, but anywhere was better than being there, trapped in the broken shell of what had once been his life. He passed a road sign, barely registering the name of the town he was entering. It didn't matter. He just needed to be away from her, away from the memory of what she had done, away from the weight of her betrayal. Max drove for hours, letting the silence settle over him like a blanket. The rage had ebbed, leaving only a hollow ache in its place. He pulled over eventually, the exhaustion finally catching up to him. The parking lot of a cheap motel loomed ahead, its flickering neon sign casting an eerie glow in the night. He turned off the engine and leaned back in his seat, staring at the cracked ceiling of the car. In the quiet of the night, the reality of it all settled in. He was alone now, truly alone. The life he knew was over. With a heavy sigh, Max closed his eyes, letting the darkness take him. Tomorrow would come, but tonight he was just numb. And for now, that was all he could handle.